in location, because we are kind of the National Wire Service, it makes sense to have a person, managing the Scotland feed, so just the Scottish stories. But smaller places like Hull, or some, or even Derbyshire or whatever, it might not make sense. So we could create this kind of automatically start to create bespoke feeds based on location, and that's quite useful from a business perspective.
Sorry, Jared, something went horribly wrong.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I think that was kind of the end of it.
No, sorry, I'm trying to get you back to your slideshow.
Here's my one chance. Do you think I'll do it? I don't think I'll do it. Well, hey, there we go. So just.
How are we looking?
Yeah. So I'll just go, and that's the final slide. There's a little thank you.
That's fine.
Do not drink cider before a presentation. I learned a valuable lesson today. So that's it. That was interesting. Yeah.
So I've basically got two questions.
Yeah.
So first is, you talked more about what, which is really interesting. So I'm interested in the how. So how do you build up the ontology that you've used?
So how do we build it up? So the design bit's the fun bit. That's the bit I enjoy, right? You just sit around and argue and kind of decide. So I work with a guy called Paul Wilton, who's a more kind of technical guy, a technical engineer, an ontology engineer. But he has a very kind of focus on developing it as an engineer. Whereas I worked with the Press Association on a previous research project, so I kind of, it's more about being, making it useful as well. So there's kind of practical solutions, but they're also, it's great if you design this, incredible ontology, but if it doesn't solve any problems, then what's the use? And another thing, especially in the news, is whether you can populate that. So it's great if we kind of create a very complex model of simple entities, but how do we get that information? So one example is, you would think it'd be quite useful to match who's married. So it'd be quite useful that if we have a Victoria Beckham story, we also mention her husband, because seems to be, there's relationship, i.e. married. But how are you going to get that information? And so we've kind of generalized that to kind of notably associated. Because journalists constantly, so for example, in location, Paul McCartney is notably associated with Liverpool. Anytime Paul McCartney is in the news, Liverpool probably wants to know about it, right? But also he lives in Surrey, so he's notably associated with Surrey. So people who get news in Surrey would also want to know what old Paul's up to, right? And so it's about kind of balancing that. So we have this term called notably associated. It's very journalistic in that the main experts could tell us there's a notable association with these two entities. And it's about building that up. Yeah. So
it's all manually populated ontology.
Yeah. So the ontology is built manually. Yeah. Actually, and then how we populate is a combination of automated means and manual means. So we have a lot of data about people and who they're notably associated with. We have a bunch of context. We have an enormous corpus. So I think it's something like 1 million articles. It's just outrageous the amount of content we have. And in that we have context. A lot of that's already been marked up in terms of category. So we already have a head start on what this thing is probably about. And it's been quite useful for disambiguation.
So that's the next interesting question I have, which is in terms of disambiguation. Suppose a story comes up, Steve Jobs retires from Apple.
Yeah.
How to avoid then tagging that with stories about the Beatles?
Yeah, so I call it the Jordan problem. So we have Jordan, the best-selling novelist. Is that right? We have Jordan, the racing team. We have Jordan, the country. Yeah. So if all three of these appear in a story, how do we solve that, right? So at a certain point, automated means will fail. The Jordan problem, it will fail. But that's where we integrate into the editorial workflow. So just as they check the story's veracity and they also do spell check, we introduce this step of, are these the entities this story is about and mentions? But we have a very strict editorial workflow. So we have a journalist writes it, they have standards by which they work, we have sub-editors, we have editors. By the time it filters through, it's pretty, and they take corrections very, very seriously. It's like a death. If they have to correct something on the wire, you feel it, it's palatable. And it's about getting that with to understand the semantic metadata. And a lot of it is kind of cultural change. So one of the examples, the reason we kind of started with this is to demonstrate to the journalists, you can find your stories quicker and more easily this way, right? So it's about finding through byline. This is the information they access. It's about improving that. So yeah, it's not automated. We kind of have a nice advantage that we have these kind of captive domain experts. It's just about making that workflow and not bothering them as much as possible. And and the ontology reflects that. So.
Coming directly on from that point,
yeah.
You said you can just about get people to tag things, but you mentioned the distinction between a story being about, like the top level is about, and stories that are just mentioning something. So what have you done to let people easily indicate the capacity in which an entity is appearing in the story?
So you can kind of give them hints. So with text analysis, you can kind of I think it's about this, and it mentions statistical analysis and blah blah blah, and clever governance that you can do. But yeah, it's about creating a very simple interface. Why we call it a mentions and abouts is because that's quite intuitive.
That's actually what you use.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's it. So and one thing I didn't kind of get into is that we try to use existing namespaces for ontologies as much as possible, because that's the whole point of this kind of linked bit. So we kind of take an approach. We've used where we can. So I think we've kind of inherited from, I think it's called like Holy Goat or something like that. There's no way we could use it without renaming it though. One executive sees Holy Goat and we're in big trouble. So the fact that we've called things stuff, we were worried that people would bother with that. But actually that's quite a good name, because we want to do intangibles and tangibles. So thing didn't quite work. Stuff, is about things like feminism, love, heart disease, these things that, we didn't capture in kind of tangibles. But we still want that, but don't mention that aren't classifications either. Because it would be nice to be able to kind of have a more kind of folksonomy approach to that. It's just about putting it in terms, and it's not just treating an ontology as a bit of engineering that is going to be used by humans, and I think that's a very important lesson to learn. So,
what's the relationship between this work and a product like OpenCalais?
Well, I think OpenCalais. So I think OpenCalais does categorization.
Yeah.
I don't know. Is there any ontology?
Places.
Yeah. So, but that's just kind of entity extraction, right? I don't know. Do they make relationships? I know they do kind of NLP relationships, like anaphoric reference, and it's quite incredible at that, actually, considering that it's just freely open and all that. But I don't know if there's kind of
I don't know what goes on behind in terms of triples between various different concepts and categories.
I don't know if they have that. It would be good to chat with them, because the idea is that why are we all making separate ontologies? Let's just work on one, and hopefully it solves all our problems. Or it's good enough that we can start sharing information using that ontology, because we do in general already. So AP is an American wire service, and we have an exchange between AP information and PA information. Would it be great if we're also using the same ontology? Just as we already agree on a lot of, the news industry agrees already on a lot of standards. There's IPTC, they have in NITF, it's all about formatting the text. And I think this is just another standard we should definitely agree upon. And then it's work in progress. There's a W3C community group called Semantic News. If anybody's interested, I'm the chair, so I can get you in. And it's about developing a kind of shared ontology, just kind of addressing these issues for the news industry. So I think it's one problem. So there's no reason we shouldn't cooperate.
Just maybe to take a slightly different view on ontology, I primarily come from software development background, and the old way of doing software was waterfall, where up front you specify everything before you start building it. And the problem with that is you get halfway through building something and you realize actually requirements are changed or that sort of thing. So, you see systems like Freebase, which is now owned by Google, and basically that lets the scheme evolve through people using the system.
Yeah.
And so there's no fixed ontology up front.
Yeah, so actually, I did not plant this man, but that's an excellent question. Yeah, exactly. And So the guy I work with, it comes from a traditional software engineering background, and he's very, very conscious of this, and he's very, very good at kind of noticing that, because that's the kind of problem with Freebase and DBpedia, that it shifts, and you just can't, as a company, we just can't depend on it. And so a lot of the kind of ontology principles are based on kind of software, software. And so one thing is kind of like contract binding, this idea that if the kind of, so for whatever reason, we don't directly use FOF for certain things, because if FOF disappears, it's an unlikely situation, but if it does, it doesn't affect our ontology. Just kind of we still have, P&C, pressnet, colon person, but it's kind of an inheritance and what kind of properties of that. So you can still, appeal to that Wayne Rooney is of type pressnet agent. And it was very deliberate not to call it press association, because it's not, a press association person. It's just, this is a news ontology, it's a very generic one.
So I think that what I was alluding to is that the new approach to software development is agile. We actually don't specify upfront things. You actually just do little bodies of work, and you learn from that, and that way you can adapt to, because obviously the work changes. I mean,
yeah, but I think that's the problem if you're starting to publish URIs. They have to be persistent. So yeah, in that example, you can't follow that way. It's too. It has to be kind of fixed that this URI always points to this thing. So we've kind of said that beforehand.
Cool. I'm going to dive in because we've got to press on.
Yeah, sorry.
So thanks very much, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks.
Right, so we're going to take a 5-minute break, run to the loo, grab a drink, and see you back here in 5 minutes. So more talk.
I guess